let's go ahead and gavel in. This is the Assembly Health Policy Committee December meeting. We're noticed from 12:30 to 1:30 today. Thank you for coming, and let's go ahead and identify ourselves for the record. If we'd start with
Ian Fedco, Anchorage Health Department.
Michael Tierney, Anchorage Health Department.
Natasha Pineda, Anchorage Health Department.
Allegra Hamer, Chair of the Anchorage Animal Care and Control Board.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Felix Rivera.
It was interesting for you talking about department.
It's totally fine.
And in the back of the room, let's start with Michael.
I'm sorry, I didn't know when. Michael Hackdown, member of the public.
Bill Fossey, the municipal manager.
Ken McCoy, Deputy Chief of Police.
Linda Rustigan, member of the community. Cynthia White, member of the community. Laura Happer, Anchorage Animal Care.
Okay. Thank you all for being here, and hopefully everyone has a copy of the agenda. I believe there are copies on the table in back. We'll have audience participation at the end, but I wanted to check and see if there's anyone here who can't stay for the whole meeting who wanted to speak now. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. We'll begin with an update from the newly renamed Anchorage Health Department Director, Natasha Pineda.
Thank you. We're all very happy to be saying we're the Anchorage Health Department, so that was fun. Thank everybody for passing that last night. I'm going to keep it pretty brief. They have a very packed presentation, and I know in the past we've had runovers, so I'm going to stick to just a couple updates. I promised an update on the child care licensing immunization requirement updates, and I forgot to print out my report, so pardon me, I'm going to read from my phone. There's been some interdepartmental coordination between public health and child care licensing, and they're working out the details on developing the code revisions to require immunizations. They're working on the fiscal requirements and the impact that would have on child care licensed facilities. So it is going to take them quite a bit longer, I think, than they had originally anticipated. They've identified the language they want to use, but they also need to work through the potential financial burdens. And they are going to be conducting a survey to all the child care facilities in Anchorage between January 2nd and February 28th. They will develop some communications that will go out to all of the child care facilities during January about the importance of immunizations and just developing some situational awareness for those child care facilities that may not even be aware of this as an issue or an area of importance. And then public health nursing, the actual nurses will be going out and doing visits with the different child care facility types in January and February, and getting a better sense of how, if you were going to change the code, how it would be operationalized. So I think that in April, they'll plan on being able to bring forward a solid timeline of what the revisions should be, and taking into consideration that financial burden for child care facilities.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Peterson, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And is there still a resistance to give your children shots because some people think that some chemical in them may cause autism?
I think that that's always a challenge that we deal with just in public health, of encouraging vaccination and herd immunity. What the current status is, or how many children in child care licensing get opt-outs, I don't know the numbers on that, but I'm happy to have them bring that in, because I think as they go and do outreach, they'll get a better sense of maybe not just the children, but for the staffers in those areas. We don't know why child care licensing staff aren't getting immunized as a normal function of their job, and that may play into it as well. So we'll be happy to put that on the list of things we report out about. So that's generally on child care licensing. The other thing I wanted to just share with everybody, I actually just got back from a meeting with the new commissioner of the Department of Health and Social Services at the state, and we were meeting with them and briefing them on the project related to the Anchorage Center for Treatment, and that went really well. And so Nancy Burke from the mayor's office, myself, Carmen Gutierrez, who's our project manager, and Steve Ashman from our Division of Human Services all met with his team. his new policy advisor, who's based out of Juneau, and had a great discussion, and also talked just generally about the future funding, future projects, and how he's going to be looking at things, and just started developing that relationship. So that was great. He's going to be a great commissioner. He's got a really great different way of looking at things, and I think that'll be good for us going into the future, and we've just established that relationship. And that's generally all. We've got a lot of stuff going on at the department, but we can do a more lengthy update in January. But in order for you guys to actually get through all the content, and know there's lots of interesting areas to cover today, so I'll go ahead and finish my
Ms.
report.
Moyer. Any questions, comments from some of the members? And just really quick, last week you held a community conversation
Yeah.
on
That's
drug
important.
misuse.
Sure.
How did that go? Just really quick.
We had Felix actually was able to participate in the last half of the meeting, and it went really well. We had a great cross-section of the community. We had new members. For those of you in the audience, we hosted a community conversation on substance misuse in Anchorage on December 11th on the 4th floor at the Lusac Library. I believe we had 65 participants from the community, and I've worked in substance abuse prevention most of my career here. The last 3 years I've been more in health policy, but there was a great number of people that weren't the same old faces. There was new people and a more robust and vibrant conversation around alcohol and substance use, and Ann Hillman volunteered her personal time to facilitate the meeting, and they have collected all of the information that was gathered there, and it will be incorporated in that report that will come to you guys in March, which will be a draft community assessment around substance misuse. So I don't know, Felix, if you have anything you want to share about the event.
Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was able to go to the second half of that meeting, and I agree. I think it was very interesting to see the diverse voices there of folks who had experienced addiction and who have recovered and are in recovery. Particularly, I sat at the table surrounding treatment, and what was fascinating to me was the advances that the matsu has made in treatment, and they are the leaders right now in terms of providing treatment and what we can do to emulate some of their successes.
Can I ask a question on that? How does the matsu fund? Thank you, Madam Chair. How does the matsu fund their treatment programs?
I can speak briefly to that. So about, I don't even know if it's 4 years ago or how long ago, the Matsu Health Foundation decided to take a serious community stake in treatment in the community. And so they invested a large number of dollars to do pretty comprehensive data dive, community assessment, interviews of all the ER docs. They interviewed all the super users of the ER. They spent almost 2.5 years assessing the issues in their community and then identifying the gaps in the system. They also used that money to I don't know if it was McDowell or who did the research, but they basically identified the amount of money that the state puts out into this city, different communities for treatment, and then identified per capita how much comes to Matsu, and identified a deficit in how much comes to them, and has used that information to successfully advocate for more money to come to their areas.
So that's answered by the state
Yeah.
is subsidizing matsu.
Absolutely, they subsidize it, but they also have community partnerships that they're investing in it. So some of their treatment centers are getting lots of investment from philanthropy. So because they have that data, they can go to all the philanthropy partners. And for those of you who've worked with the kind of philanthropy in Alaska, they coordinate together. So Rasmussen, Matsu, Health Foundation, and the Mental Health Trust and Children's Trust will all go together and say, yeah, Set Free wants to do this big new kinds of treatment, and they ask for the money that they need, and they have the data to demonstrate why they need it and why it will improve their community, and they go forth and do it. That's an area that we have a blind spot on. We don't have the resources invested in being able to identify in that laser way, because we don't have a foundation that's dedicated, like that Matsu Health Foundation is just dedicated to improving health in the Matsu region, and they have quite a bit of resource that they put into that every year.
There's no equivalent in Anchorage.
There is not that I can think of. There are lots of philanthropy organizations that work on behalf of the whole state and have vested interest in and probably would support efforts to replicate that kind of a study and that kind of research, but they're not dedicated just to Anchorage.
Can ask one last follow-up question? Madam Chair?
Yes,
Thank you.
Mr. Dunbar.
Proportionally, does the Matsu or Anchorage get more money for drug treatment from the state?
They got less historically, and I don't know if they've managed to get more. Yeah, they did. Yeah, they were getting less, yeah, per person, and that was part of their argument. They also have worked incredibly hard to require the state to separate Matsu data from Anchorage data, because historically, Anchorage entities will use Matsu numbers to go after funding for Anchorage projects, but that they don't necessarily benefit the Matsu. And so that's something that they've also done. Well, you'll see now in state reports, Matsu separated out. That's been a part of their advocacy to say, you know, we have a big growing population, we have big growing needs, and that's how we're going to make you understand that we're important, and here's why. And they've changed their system, and they've engaged their system in a pretty meaningful way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar.
Madam
Thank you,
Chair.
Ms. Commander. Mr. Thompson?
Additionally, they also have their regional health center, which is very profitable.
Yeah.
They run as few nurses as they can to provide the health care, and so they maximize their billing, and then that money is put into the foundation, a substantial profit of it. And so their foundation is funded by profits from the hospital.
Yeah. And we do have hospitals with philanthropy arms. They're just designed differently than that way.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Any other questions, comments before we move on to the next item? Okay, so item number 2, animal care and control presentation. Ms. Becca, will you be Mr. Tierney?
Yes, members of the Assembly and everybody that's present, good afternoon. And I'm grateful to have this opportunity to brief you on animal care and control and do a review of the Durango dog's case. Just to start off, I would like to say that the purpose of Title 17 is to promote public health and safety and to encourage responsible pet ownership. But there's a lot of people that it takes to make that mandate come true. And some of the role players or the roles that we have is in the Anchorage Health Department, the director is the Chief Animal Control Officer, although many of those duties and responsibilities are delegated to the manager of the animal shelter or Anchorage Animal Care and Control, Dr. Myra Wilson. Some of the things that maybe aren't delegated is if you want to increase or decrease classified animal restrictions, that's something that's held back at this level. And then there's my role as the contract administrator to manage the contract, make sure the facilities are up to date, oversee the budget, oversee the board management, and emergency preparedness. The Animal Care and Control Contractor, which is the Animal Licensing and Placement Service, who is a subsidiary of Denali Universal Services. And I'm happy to say they've been with us since 1999. And since then, they've been managing the day-to-day shelter management, enforcing Title 17. They have a very healthy public education and outreach program, a volunteer coordinator program, and they handle pet sheltering and emergencies. Another one of our partners is the Anchorage Police Department that helps us with animal cruelty law. And I am remiss that I didn't put up there the prosecutor and the civil law, as we certainly rely on them for interpretation of Title 17. We have a very robust and energetic Animal Control Advisory Board. They advise the mayor and assembly on all matters pertaining to animals within the municipality. And I won't read the entire laundry list, but we have several community partners, from Friends of Pets, Straw for Dogs, many, many more folks that we rely upon. Now, we know that there is a strong correlation between pets and health. Some of them are medical related, decreased blood pressure, decreased cholesterol levels. Some of them are mental, it decreases feeling of loneliness, combats depression. Some of it is just physical, getting out and walking your dog and socializing. And at the same time, we would like to keep the public free from harm, any animal attacks, any animal bites, and free from disease, be it rabies, parasites, cat scratch disease. And as I stated, in the event of an emergency like our earthquake that we just had or the McHugh fire a couple years back, we're always prepared to stand up any pet sheltering, as we realize that owners, they think of their pets as family and they don't want to evacuate without taking their pets. The overview of the Anchorage Animal Care and Control, well, as I said, they care for the animals. This is 24/7, or not 24/7, excuse me, 8 to 8, but 7 days a week, day to day, doing the day-to-day shelter, looking at the medical care, and they have a very robust program as far as good claim rates returning pets to their owners, as well as adopting pets into homes. They manage a very active volunteer program. In fact, they have 80 volunteers ranging from age 18 up to 70 plus. And then they provide educational programs to kindergarten through 6th grade. Very good outreach program. They conduct shelter tours, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, elementary schools. They offer different programs such as low-cost rabies vaccination to the community. And once a month, they do a free pet, food, and supply giveaway. These are from donations that is more than we can use in-house. In fact, they have, I think they just exceeded 14,000 in Facebook followers as of last month. And then one of the tough parts is enforcing the animal law, regulating aggressive animals and impounding loose animals, responding to injured animals, performing welfare checks, assisting the Anchorage Police Department and the Anchorage Fire Department in the case of animal cruelty or taking an animal into protective custody, and then handling those nuisance calls of barking, clucking, animal waste, and making sure that dogs and facilities are licensed. Now, everybody should have a handout. This is a draft AO, and I believe we'll probably wind up doing a work session. This is very draft, but I would like to go over some of the things that the Department of Health has been working in collaboration with the advisory board and as well as with members of the public. And if you would, I'd just go through some of them. Oh, did I not? Thank you very much. You are. Okay, if you look on page 1, line 12, there are some definitions that we're adding to the code, and these are strictly to reinforce some of the other changes that you will see being made. On page 2, line 16, you'll see we're removing all references to wolf hybrids. The only reference that will be left in is a reference to 8.55 because it is illegal to have a wolf hybrid, so all these other references are obsolete. So take them out to make it less confusing. On page 2, line 27, you'll see the standards for operating animal facilities, and we're making some advancements to that for everybody. But then if you look on page 3, line 27, specifically, we're adding in an animal rescue shelter license, and we're mandating some regulations upon them, one being medical records for each animal under their care, and all medical records should be made available to the new owner. And then that they have to maintain a current listing of all foster homes within their network.
Were wolf hybrids allowed before and regulated, and now they're just outlawed?
They were grandfathered in. They were outlawed, and all those that have been grandfathered will have long since passed away, is my understanding.
Gotcha.
On page 4 on page line 38, we just cut the ribbon on the Whisper Faith Kodak part, so we need to add that into the code under off-leash dog park spaces. On page 7. Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Davidson?
Yes, ma'am.
Why do you opt, this is just sort of a like structural question, why do you opt to list all of the dog park spaces in a code? Because as soon as you create a new one, then that makes the code outdated. Have you considered doing a like C list on our website or C something where you can more regularly update and change that?
I have not, but we can certainly take it under advisement.
I mean, I don't have a strong opinion about it. It just seems like it sets you up for being out of date. So.
Well, and there's also a map in the code. I mean, I don't have that printed out here, but it would also prevent us from having to update the map.
Yeah. Just something to consider.
Thank you. Okay, on page 7, line 35, this is where we're adding in the new proposed license for animal rescue and animal rescue shelters. And on page 9, line 33, and this is based on recent events, we want to change it so that any animal that is taken into protective custody not only has to pay the control fees, that is the boarding, the rabies, the licensing, and any medical fees, but they also have to pay any back fines that were owed at that time. And this would make it consistent with what we do with any animal that is impounded, like a loose animal versus protective custody. And then on page 10, line 10, this is just for clarification. There is a section in the code, 1710.030B.3, that says that if we issue a notice to vacate, and that is we give somebody 24 hours in order to vacate their animals from the premise, that we can impound the animal and potentially they have to forfeit the animal. So this is just putting it under this section so it ties it together. This section being impound an animal subject to impoundment. And then on page 10, line 44, we're making a clarification for a level 5 classification that any animal, regardless of whether it is restrained, for a third time injures or kills a domestic animal. That would make that a level 5 classification. Any questions on the draft?
Ms. Quinn-Davidson?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my understanding, I had emailed Natasha, and my understanding was that part of the code change would include a discussion that I've been having with some members of the public, and I know she's aware of, as well as Bill Falsey, which is that if owners are under investigation for a crime and a dog, and they can probably explain it better, but a dog or other animal is held in custody, that investigation might go on for a year or more, and in the meantime, the dog is in custody and not able to be fostered out. And there was an interest in changing the code so that those dogs can get some love and go home with someone and have a better life while they're waiting for the result of their case. I have requested, and I maybe it's just a miscommunication, but that part of this package be including that if you think it's appropriate. I think a laborer might be able to speak to it too.
Yes. Well, on the next slide, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'll just say this first to address your question. We are not specifically looking at the code in terms of fostering out a dog that is in protected, well, not protected custody because of a criminal case, because that dog is evidence. So I would like to discuss this with the prosecutor's office, and in fact, the particular dog in question, my understanding, is a state case that is prosecuting it. So we don't own the dog, but we're hoping that this bond that I'm going to discuss here real quick might alleviate some of the concerns of an animal being left there for a year or longer.
So can you speak to why it matters if it's under, if it's a state case? Also, I just don't see why if they're evidence, but you can, if the evidence is whether the animal's injured or whatever it is, you can collect that data and you can document it, and then you can let the animal have a night with a family that wants to take him on a walk and care for him. So I guess I just don't quite understand the reasoning.
Well, I'd be happy to, I would like to vet that with the prosecutor's office prior to taking it forward, because I know those are the questions that will come up, because right now that is how the, Dr. Wilson is and has been seeing it as evidence, not our property, belongs to somebody else. Now, they do have volunteers that come in and walk the dogs, but they're under, if they will, for lack of a better word, under supervision.
Do you have a lot of cases where animals stay there for quite a while, or what?
There have been.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, because the court system, sometimes there's delays and it takes a while.
And has the Animal Control Board considered this, or is this just something that constituent or members of the public are interested in?
This was just, yeah, I can speak.
Yes,
Yes,
go ahead,
please.
Sarah.
This was just actually brought to our attention through some recent email chain, and so it is not yet on our agenda.
Okay.
And I think after Mr. Cheney is able to review this a little bit with legal, it would appear on our agenda for the Title 17 subcommittee.
Great.
And so we're certainly aware of it. Thanks for everyone for bringing this up. And we just want to know if this is something that we can even go forward
That's
considering.
perfect. Thanks. Thank you, Ms. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Davidson.
Madam Chair, just a really small point before we go further. Looking at this draft ordinance, the list of places where the outdoor dog parks, to add in Whisper for that park, there is a planned dog park at Chauncey Muldoon Park. It's not built yet. We just got 700,000 for phase 2, and it's not clear if that's going to be part of phase 2 or not, but at some point in the future, we're going to want a dog park there. That part of the city doesn't really have a dog park yet. does it make sense to add it here and in anticipation of that, or should we do to wait until the park is actually built before we specify it?
There actually is a process in the code for establishing off-leash dog areas, and we probably should do that process, and it involves the Parks and Rec Commission and the Animal Control Advisory Board.
Okay. Well, we already, I mean, it's already master planned,
Yeah.
and the Parks Department's planning to build it, so far at least it seems it wants to build it, so that's fine. So we have to go back and revise this ordinance every time we add a dog park, is that right?
At this point, but we could certainly look into doing the suggestion here and see if we could have a separate list.
Okay. Okay, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Croft?
So in our area, we had a dog that had attacked our dog, but I didn't file a report, just talked to him about it. Scared my dog, but didn't. We've heard him a little bit. And we recovered. And then later killed another dog in the area. And so that put him on 3. The injuring or killing another animal puts you into the level 3.
If it's the first time.
Well, and it wasn't the first time, it was the first reported time.
And that's,
Yeah, so we had that for Buffalo located. It really wasn't the first time, but 3. And then that owner so had the restriction of muzzling and the restriction of had to be in a kennel when at home or confined area. And pretty consistently wasn't doing that. And the fine was capped at 500? I don't remember, but I remember it was something that this person didn't get caught very much and didn't mind paying. And I was really just told that's all that can happen. And if they want to continue to pay a $500 fine for walking around without a muzzle, they can do it. Is there any, is that understanding correct? And is there any fix in this for the willful failure to abide by dangerous animal restrictions?
I think there is a graduated citation fine.
There is.
And
But it tops out at what?
And also, I believe there's a provision in the animal cruelty code that if someone does act like that, could potentially be utilized.
So
Under the penal code, under 8.55.
What is it top out the fine?
Is it 1,500 or 2,500?
It's very progressive. I think the third offense gets, $300 for the first violation, $600 for the second violation, and then $1,250 for the third and subsequent violations.
So tops out at $1,250. Okay, and then I'd be interested offline if you read that criminal code. If that, like, should be for most people enough of a disincentive to get them to do it, but if it wasn't very rich or very obstinate, what other recourse may neighbors have?
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Any other questions? Anybody? Please continue.
Along with the changes that are already that are being proposed that have been through legal and the ACAB has looked at, there are some that are still currently under development, still being discussed, and that is we want to, we're looking at setting up a requirement for outside dogs, which is dogs that are predominantly housed outdoors, and what their shelter requirements will be, including how to prohibit any long-term housing, say in a vehicle or other confined space. And then second proposal under development is we would like to subject any animals that are brought in for animal cruelty charged under 8.55 that they would have to post a bond for the first 30 days of care, and then every subsequent 30 days continue to post a bond for their care while the legal proceedings are going on. And this would be consistent with the statute that the state passed last year for the state. Any questions?
Any questions?
Okay, now our timeline, aggressive timeline, if all the stars align, this evening the ACAB Title 17 Subcommittee will be meeting at 5 o'clock at the Anchorage Animal Care and Control. And this is where we're hoping to finalize our proposal. And then tomorrow night, the ACAB meeting at 5:30 p.m., we hope to review and approve any changes, and then route them over to legal for review. And then on January 24th, have public input one more time. And then in February, get it introduced to the Assembly and get it out for Assembly public hearing. Now, before we talk about the dogs in the Durango, I'd just like to briefly go over animal welfare checks and when an animal control officer investigates. One of the scales that they use is called a Tufts Animal Care and Condition Tax Scale, and I have copies if anybody would like copies when you're done. But they look at the animal's body condition. Is it emaciated? Is it got an embedded collar? Nails too long? Does it appear injured? Is it hobbling? And when they look at the shelter, you know, it is related to the time of the year. What is the breed of the dog? Its age? Is it a puppy? Is it a senior dog? What is its condition? And the size of the shelter that allows for normal posturing. And the weather. Is it inclement weather? Is it rain, snow, sun, and proper ventilation? Area free from excessive feces, objectionable odor. And if it's warranted, they'll take the interior temperature and the ambient outside temperature. And then, of course, do the animals have access to food and water? They always look to make sure the water dish is not frozen over, and current rabies vaccination, and that the animal is properly licensed. Now, this is just a quick summary on the dogs in the Durango case. To date, there have been 4 notices to comply that have been issued, 2 for control and confinement, 1 for care and sanitation, 1 for chronic noise. There's been a total notice of violations issued, and the vast majority of those for no rabies vaccination or license, and 1 for no special purpose license, and 3 for control and confinement, 2 of those most recently, that also resulted in 2 classifications that you see at the bottom. 1 dog classified as a level 1 for showing threatening or aggressive behavior towards a citizen, and then a level 4 for actually biting one of our citizens.
Now, what is a special purpose license?
The special purpose license, well, there's several different ones, but in this particular case, if you have 4 more dogs, you have to have a multi-animal license. And on this particular time, the owner started out with 2 dogs, and then later on had 3 dogs, and then at one point, I believe it was a sibling, took on a 4th dog, which was a sibling. And so at that point, it required a multi-animal license. And if I could just briefly go over and summarize all the investigations or welfare checks that have been done by the animal control officers to date. Back in May 2016 was the first request for a welfare check for 2 dogs living in the Durango. The dogs were healthy, conditions in the vehicle were found to be adequate, but they were issued NOVs for lack of rabies and license. And then October 2017, there was complaint of loose dogs, and they were issued a warning and cited again for lack of rabies vaccinations and license. And in March of 2018, their 22-month gap was the second welfare check was requested. No welfare violations were present. And then it picks up the pace because April 2nd through July 2nd, 7 welfare checks. And during one of the calls, the officer did require the owner to clean up feces that was outside of the vehicle, but there were no welfare violations. July, and this was when the multi-animal license issue came up, the owner surrendered one of the 4 dogs. That dog was deemed not adoptable and was subsequently euthanized. And then between July and September of 2018, there was 4 welfare checks conducted, 4 reports of aggressive dogs, 2 reports of chronic noise that resulted in notices to comply and violations for noise, loose animals, and lack of rabies and rabies vaccination and licensing. Nothing on the welfare. September 28, 2018, the owner was issued a notice to comply, and at this point, it was stipulated that they must keep the interior temperature of the vehicle between 28 and 80 degrees.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
80 degrees is really high. If windows are closed, that can turn into a bus. Not that it's usually 80 here.
Right. Not interior temperature.
Oh, interior. I'm sorry.
Interior
Thank
temperature,
you.
yes.
Can I ask a question? This might go, I'm sorry, Chair. This might go to a broader policy. I understand that there are differences in breeds, right? What temperatures are appropriate for different breeds. So I grew up in the interior in the village, surrounded by dog teams. They slept outside, 40, 50 below. And so, like, you're 28 degrees, that seems pretty warm to me. But why such a? Is it because of the nature of the breed that they're uncomfortable under 28 degrees?
It's predominantly because these animals are short-haired, and this tack scale, and it has a sliding scale based on, like I say, the size of the dog, whether they're acclimatized to cold weather, you know, and I can provide you a copy of that. But they kind of use that to distinguish between the different breeds and what the temperature would be.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, because there were literally probably 60 dogs on that block, and they all had these little houses with chains outside all the time, and they were in dog lots, and they didn't come in at night, and it was, you know, some interior Alaska was 40 or 50 below, and that's how it was. And so we've gotten some emails that say, like, you know, dogs are unsafe under 36 below, and it must be based on the breed, because again, the huskies seem fine. Much.
Not
Oh, 30, yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, these huskies were under 36 below, and we're getting emails saying they're 36 is on, so that to me seems unusual. But that's what I'm reading.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Ms. Davidson?
Sure, I was just gonna make sure I understood you, but there's a scale that each officer gets to determine based on the breed what that range of number should be. This 28 to 80 is just in this situation, right?
Well, yes, this was actually based off of it wasn't a decision, it was a plea that was done in a previous case, a Hertzberger case, where there was 22 cats in a vehicle. And I was 22 cats in a vehicle. And that might have been a college. Yes, and that is what the judge imposed. So they've kind of looked to that, but now they're kind of looking at the scale and they are. I mean, first and foremost, they will look at the condition of the animal.
But when you say the individual officer and the individual
Correct,
case,
the animal control
then
officer.
they get to decide, he or she gets to decide what the range is in that case.
Well, Captain Larson is their supervisor, so he overlooks any enforcement action that people under his supervision. So there is a second layer, you know, and then there's Dr. Wilson. So if they need to confer, because if it's a
I think
officer,
what she's trying to identify is it in code that we've decided as a city that 28 to 80 is the standard for all dogs. Is it the standard for these dogs? Is it a standard that the animal control officers get to determine each time they go out? I think that's what she's trying to say. This isn't in code that is 28 to 80. This is a decision we've made based on this range scale that we use as a reference in this particular case. And you're wanting to know, like, if it was a schnauzer and 4 schnauzers in a car, would we have used a different range? And I think we might have because of this.
Okay. And it's to Forrest's point too. I mean, if there are 2 huskies in the car, 80 might be way too hot for the interior temperature. And so, who makes that decision? And is it case by case? I think the answer is yes, but I'm just okay.
it would be a case by case determination.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Any other questions, comments? Please continue.
Okay, on September 30th, there was an APD assist because a car was possibly being towed, but the owner was able to start the car and move her vehicle. And then September 30th through October 29th, there were 3 welfare checks conducted. And then on October 30th, the dogs were taken into protective custody. And then on November 4th, the owner was able to claim the dogs, in which case, and they were vaccinated and licensed by animal control, and the fees were paid, but not the outstanding fines, which alludes to why we want to change the code so that all outstanding fines have to be paid as well. And then on November 5th, a welfare check was attempted, but the vehicle was not in the neighborhood. November 12th, a welfare check conducted, no violations present. And then on November 17th, the 2 dogs got loose. 2 dogs were loose in a parking lot. 1 bit a citizen, and that dog was classified a level 4, was unable to be claimed, and was subsequently euthanized, and the other dog was classified a level 1. And then we have had 5 additional welfare checks. The last attempt was December, or the last check was on December 15th, and the dogs did not display any signs of being cold. There was food, water, and a heater plugged into an adjacent building, not strung across the street, which had happened on one occasion. And that was the final welfare check. We'd just like to stipulate the difference, because this came up in conversation from the public and from the control board at times, that animal care and control, they are often the first responder. They're called out on a welfare check, so they might be the first ones that are there to determine whether or not they're going to call APD because it's animal cruelty or animal neglect. But they can issue a notice to comply, which is a warning. They can issue a notice of violation, which is a citation, or, although not used to date, but a tool at their disposal, is a notice to vacate. But what they don't do is they don't have powers of arrest, and they do not cite anybody for cruelty or neglect under Chapter 8.55. Now, in the Anchorage Code, Title 17, it does say Anchorage police officers and animal control and other authorized peace officers shall have the authority to enforce and issue civil or criminal citations or complaints for violations of this title and penal code. But under the contract, we do not have it set up that animal control officers impose any criminal. They go through APD. And then potential resolutions at this point is if the owner could obtain suitable housing for pets and for herself, we could amend Title 17 to disallow long-term use of a vehicle as a shelter, primary enclosure. We could issue a notice to vacate should the ambient or the interior temperature drop below 28 degrees. And the Anchorage Police Department may criminally charge the owner with neglect should the animal's health be endangered due to extreme temperatures.
Ms. Quinn-Davidson? Thank you, Madam Chair. Where does the owner currently live? Is she homeless or living in a car herself?
She has, I really don't know at this point, but she has been with a sister at one point, and then at one point she did say she was living in the vehicle with the animals.
And in our early interactions with her, correct, she was housed. This has not always been the status of the situation, and it's variable, and so it's hard for us to indicate what her status is, and she's not here to speak up for herself or communicate about it. So I don't know that we could say.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. So there are 3 dogs then now in the vehicle?
2.
Oh, 2. We're down to 2. Okay. And so where is the vehicle? Is it? We heard reports of the vehicle being moved around.
Predominantly, it's been over on Grand Larry Street, but it has been mobile.
On a city street in general, or has it ever? When some of the calls came in, was the vehicle located on private property, or was it always on a public street?
The earlier calls were in other sections of the city, other addresses. But as of 2018, around March, it was predominantly on Grand Larry. But when the bite incident took place, that was in another part of the city in a parking lot.
Thank you. Any other, Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Grand Larry happens to be in Mr. Dunbar in my district. And so we've been occasionally getting emails and phone calls from neighbors worried about the welfare of these dogs. And my question is, the lady owes fines that she hasn't paid, but she did get the licenses, so they can't take the dogs away because she hasn't paid the fine. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
And so, she, obviously, I used to have a dog myself, so I understand the connection and not wanting to give up your pets. It must be a very difficult situation for her not to be able to have the dogs inside or have an apartment somewhere where the landlord allows you to have dogs. I know those are harder and harder to find. It's a difficult situation. Do you have any ideas of how we might alleviate this situation?
Well, we have a mobile intervention team in town that we have put in contact with the owner. I don't know of any resolution that has come out of that, but we are trying to steer her towards services that might be able to help her. She has said to the staff down at Anchorage Animal Care and Control on a couple occasions that she thought she might be able to have an apartment that should be moving into, but that has not occurred to date that I'm aware of.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Quinn Davidson? So just to circle back to the code changes, proposed code changes you were talking about at the beginning.
Yes, ma'am.
Excuse me, how would that impact her situation right now? It would allow you to collect
She would have had to pay all her back fines
in order to get her dogs back initially, or in order to do what?
in order to claim the animals. Correct.
So from now on, sorry.
But we want to continue to work on that, and I just caution you because not every situation, we don't run into these situations too frequently, which is good. But I always caution folks that if it occurs again, that person may not have back fines. We still want to work on resolving this situation for the future.
So the future language, if she were in the same situation and then couldn't pay her fines, she couldn't get her dogs back.
Correct.
She's just almost sort of grandfathered. Yeah.
Well, she's not grandfather. That's the current code.
So if the code changes, then will her dogs be taken from her since she hasn't paid her fines?
If they were impounded or taken into protective custody, but we would not reach out and take some of these animals from them just because they owe fines.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, so two quick questions on that. The first is that I understand we're talking about couldn't get your dogs back, pay your fines. Is that in the current revision now, or are you talking about a separate ordinance? Is that in the ordinance you're proposing?
Correct, yes, sir.
And the second question is, like, think about her situation again. She had 4 dogs, 2 were taken, both were euthanized.
Yes, sir.
And I'm wondering if that's the perverse kind of result of this. I mean, if she were to have them taken again, the remaining 2, what are the chances they actually get adopted out versus being euthanized because she can't pay her fines?
Well, each animal would be assessed for adoptability. But the likelihood, there may be one dog that might have some chance of adoptability, but we wouldn't know that until we're able to assess it. But
yeah, so that's sort of the perverse outcome, right? We have people who want to help dogs, help these dogs in particular, and the sort of solutions that are being proposed, and I don't know if they're being pushed by the same people, would result in the euthanization of these dogs. And I don't know if that is our intended outcome.
Mr. Constant?
There's a philosophical question there. The question is, did allowing them to be in this cage for 2 years precipitate the violent behaviors,
Sure.
right, and create the situation in which the dogs become unadoptable or unrestorable, right? And so the argument isn't about these dogs particularly. There would be some in the community who would say, write these dogs off as a sacrifice to bad policy because it's likely that they aren't restorable. We've even heard that. But the fact is, in the future, what is the plan for this case? Are we going to allow this to become the norm and allow other dogs to fall into this trap? So that's really the conundrum that we face as policymakers.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do we know how much the fines have amounted to up to this point? How much is she owe?
I believe they're in excess of $9,000.
Anything else, Mr. Peterson?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would like to pause here because we're almost out of time. And I know there are members of the public who came specifically for this discussion. Is there anyone here from the public who wanted to speak on this topic? Is that Ms. White? Yep. Would you come forward? Or closer so we can hear you.
So I just took a couple notes. I've been on this case since April. I do a lot of lost dog recovery, and since I do a lot of lost dog recovery, People tend to email me about just random stuff. Lady.
Are you in the animal control, or did you say?
I'm a private person.
So
I'm just
when
a
you
member of
say
the
on this
community.
case, you've been
I
following?
use that metaphorically.
Okay, following the case, got it.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, what's your name?
Cynthia White.
Cynthia White.
I've emailed many times, all of you. So just a random person emailed me in March or April about this situation on Grand Larry. The car has been parked. If anyone has any questions about this case, feel free to ask me. I feel like I know more, and I don't take this the wrong way, than everyone put together here about this case in terms of I've done Freedom of Information Act requests from Animal Control. I have so many documents. I've asked so many questions. So I just have a bunch of random stuff to throw out here. So the car has been parked primarily on Grand Larry since April. It has been moved maybe 3 times since then. She's tied her dogs up in public parks on next, to the car handle and left them there. That's one example of it not being on Grand Larry, but primarily the car has been on Grand Larry. The APD has gone so far as to tag the car because you're not supposed to park a car on a public street for more than 24 hours. This car has never been towed. I don't know what the exception is to this one car never being privy to that Muni law, in which a car is not supposed to be parked on a Muni street for more than 24 hours in the same spot. But it has been. Before people started getting excited about this, it was parked in the same spot for 3 months. In the last, 2 months, it's been parked in the same spot primarily for a month. One thing that's kind of missing from this is a photo of the car, which would kill you if you haven't seen it already. And one thing that hasn't been noted about this car is that this whole time, except for the last month, the car was covered in plastic trash bags, black. All of the windows were covered in black plastic trash bags. So it's like these dogs were living in a box with no light, so yes, living in those conditions will make an animal crazy. Imagine if you were kept in a box for 9 months and there's no noting how often she takes them out to go to the bathroom. I have people that are in contact with me that live in the same apartment building that she does. She's not homeless. She doesn't live in the car. Her animal control reports, they called me on Saturday because they were doing a welfare check, and they were waiting for her quote to come down from her apartment. She's not living in the car, ever. And I'm really annoyed at the news media for perpetuating that without knowing the facts. So I feel like I got off track to the point I was just making. She lives in the apartment. Okay, so the dogs, I'm in contact with people that live in the apartment building. They cannot quote me more than 5 times, if that. That would be an exaggeration. Some people say, we've never seen her take the dogs out of the car in 5 months, okay? You mentioned 2 years, it's actually going on 3 years. Since 2016, these dogs have been in there. There was a welfare check done this past Saturday. The temperatures were within normal limits. Short-haired dogs, pit bulls, should not be living in a car in temperatures I can't even below 40. So the breed really does play a big part. So I'm not surprised that the dog bit somebody, because obviously dogs have quite a good sense of smell and various things. So if you leave an animal or you in a box for 9 months, 3 years, whatever, and then all of a sudden you're out in the daylight, just imagine the stimulation that animal is experiencing, probably painfully so. So I'm not surprised it bit somebody. I would be surprised if any of these dogs made it out of this situation without being euthanized based on the history. But I refuse to just ignore the situation based on the fact that they might be euthanized. We've all been perpetuating the situation by not dealing with it. It's all on us. It's on animal control. It's on APD. So going to...
And if you could wrap up, Ms.
Sure.
White, just so we can get to the other folks.
Okay, there's so many things. In terms of not having frozen water in the car, if you were to read the history, one of the visits to animal control, what they had was a block of ice. That was what they were given by the owner, and that was acceptable. So apparently the water's not supposed to be frozen, but she decided to buy them a block of ice as their water, and that was okay. So I kind of see a inconsistency there. One thing that's really lacking from this Tufts care chart, which I think needs to be incorporated, mental health. Mental health. You have the body type, you have how much fur they have, you have if they have muscle tone. What about their mental health? Is there any way to bring that into consideration? And one thing that is a problem is that every single variable, heat, light, if the animal can walk around the car, if there's enough room in the car, if a car is adequate, is all subject to every single animal control officer's discretion. So I might not agree with it, somebody else might think it's kind of okay, etc. So there's no consistency. One second, please. Okay. So part of the problem is that the head of animal control, the manager of animal control, I know has been presented with this situation, and she herself, Myra Wilson, decided that the dogs were okay in the car. So we've heard from Health and Human Services, we've heard from APD, blah, blah, blah. And APD needs to be brought up to speed in terms of neglect. If they're the ones that are judging animals in cars or cruelty or neglect, this past Saturday, or no, when the dogs were taken away for protective custody, one of the officers was asked, should we charge her with neglect? And the officer said, I don't think it's neglect. Does the officer know the history? Did the officer know the temperature? Did the officer know when the last ate, when they were last walked? Any of that?
Thank you, Ms. White. I apologize for interrupting. I know you have much more to cover. We are just about out of time, and I know there are folks who would like to respond, and no questions right now. Okay, so we'll get some follow-up on those points.
Okay.
Michael, did you want to speak as well?
I'll follow up separately because I know time is short. I just want to introduce myself. I'll follow up with you. But I'm Michael Hackdown. I'm an animal welfare advocate. I know many of you, but I don't know all of you. Formerly Executive Director at Alaska SPCA, formerly Alaska State Director for the Humane Society of the United States. I have a lot to say, and in the interest of time, I'll follow up by email with this group, if I may, about some ideas, some comments I have, but also some ideas to help move things forward and to get better outcomes.
And I'm assuming that you and Ms. White are likely going to be at the Animal Control Advisory Board meetings as well? And will there be an opportunity then to discuss?
There will be.
Some of the, okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to ask Deputy Chief McCoy a question, if I might be able to, because I thought that officers were chalking the tires to make sure that vehicle was being moved. Is that correct?
That is correct. So as far as APD's involvement in this goes, we've responded numerous times to this call, and when our officers respond, they're responding in a manner to investigate whether or not there are criminal charges for animal cruelty. And most of the time when we charge those crimes, it's very clear the dog has been severely injured, killed, and in this particular circumstance, we're looking at is the care adequate. And in trying to assess that, we have to rely on the Department of Animal Control to help us navigate through this gray area. Is the conditions adequate for these animals? And if we're given information that it is, no charges are warranted. As you are aware, our officers are very resourceful, and we've received numerous calls and complaints about this particular matter. So our officers are looking at, well, we can't resolve the animal issue. Is there some other way to resolve this? And that's where they've looked at the vehicle as far as being parked on that particular street. The vehicle has been marked and tagged. However, the vehicle has moved, albeit sometimes it's not a lot of distance, but the vehicle has been moved. And so that's been an ongoing process. And yes, we do not have officers following up daily to see if this particular car is moved. We just on resources to devote to investigating whether or not this car is moving. But we've responded about 18 times to this particular instance. So it's not something we've ignored, but it's not something that's we have dedicated resources to.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Dunbar and then Mr. Constant.
Yeah, quick follow-up on that. So we've heard testimony here that the windows of this Durango are blacked out with black plastic bags. And then she's also moving this vehicle. It seems to me that would be some kind of moving violation. You couldn't black out the windows of a vehicle and then move the vehicle. Is that?
Well, the vehicle's not being moved in our presence, so.
Well, okay, isn't there some way to say, well, we chalked it, we know you moved it, your windows are blacked out. I mean, I thought you could get fined just for tinting windows, let alone covering them with black plastic bags.
If the vehicle's traveling, yes.
You have to actually observe it traveling in order to write that ticket?
Yes, we have to observe the moving violation.
Let's change that law. Why should we allow black plastic bags to cover windows and then allow the vehicle to move? We're not thinking she's towing the vehicle. She's clearly moving it with the engine of the vehicle itself.
Well, that's questionable whether or not the vehicle is operating.
So she might actually be like putting it neutral and pushing it?
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Thompson?
So does this actually then bring into the question the code section 880 that if you have so many nuisance calls, you start receiving aggregated fines? I mean, we're at 18. 6 is the number that's allowable, or 8. And I don't think it's 10. I think it's less than that.
It's 8 for residential
Right, and so now we're at 18, so we're 10 over what's allowed. That would be $5,000.
I would have to defer to the legal opinion whether or not that would qualify as residential.
Right, because the calls on the street is questions.
Anyone else want to comment? We're a bit over time. Anybody want to have the last word? Okay. Happy holidays. We're adjourned. Thank you for coming.